On today's World Insight, the search for global solutions to the world's need for energy, labor, and agriculture. The answers from three heads of United Nations agencies on the sidelines of the 2020 World Economic Forum.
Hello and welcome to Davos Insight at the World Economic Forum this year. I'm Tian. Energy makes the world go around. However, geopolitics has been the forever headache for the energy industry. At a time when sustainability is emphasized, the energy sector is facing an extra layer of challenge and opportunity. On those, I spoke to Dr. Faith Birol, the Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, or otherwise known as IEA. Dr. Birol, what a pleasure to see you at the World Economic Forum.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you too.
Good to see a smile on your face because you are facing a lot of crises to handle with your position right now. One of the things is what's going on in the Middle East, particularly recently in Iraq and Iran. What does that mean for the international energy supply from your perspective, sir?
Now, we all know that the Middle East is and will remain the center of the global oil markets. Big chunk of the oil to Asia, the engine of the global economy, goes from Middle East.
And also sometimes for Europe too.
For Europe too, but when we look at the global economy, Asia's importance is extremely critical. The growth comes from China, India, ASEAN countries there.
Northeast Asia also.
Exactly, yeah. And the oil goes from Middle East. And now when we look at the Middle East nowadays, Middle East has been a difficult place, but now it is becoming a dangerous place. Now we have seen the issues with Iran, but now if you ask me what is my main worry is Iraq. Because Iraq is today the second largest oil producer in OPEC, right after Saudi Arabia. And Iraq, within the country and around the country, is facing substantial political tensions. If something happens to Iraq, we may well see the current stability of the oil markets can well be put in question, and we may see some difficulties. So for me, the real concern nowadays from an international oil markets point of view, the stability of Iraq.
Iraq is not going to be, but is already a battleground of proxy wars among the regional and international powers. Sir, from your perspective, how can you make sure, despite of the political difficulties, the smooth operation of the oil fields and the securities of the oil fields as well as the supply to the rest of the world?
Now, there are two issues here. One of them is the production of oil, and the Middle East is very important here. The second one is how this oil goes to the markets. And the big chunk of the oil going to Asia goes through the Hormuz Strait. Yes. If there is a problem in the Hormuz Strait, then you are cutting the veins of the blood of the economy in Asia. This would have a major problem. So therefore, we are, as International Energy Agency, we are monitoring the situation very closely day by day. And if something would have happened, then we have to take some measures.
What are some of the measures you are thinking about now, contingency plan-wise?
I hope currently nothing happens. This is my hope. But one has to be careful, ready for the rainy days. So in case of a supply disruption, we have to talk with the countries around the world how we can push this supply disruption back through different measures.
What are the numbers you're looking at?
Now, it will be depending on the issue, the disruption. For example, today, Iraq is producing about 5 million barrels per day, substantial amount of oil. And this
barrels.
Barrels, exactly. And this oil of course, a big chunk of it goes to Asia. If there is a problem there, it will affect everybody. It will affect the oil markets, then the economy. If the Asian economy is affected, the global economy is affected. So therefore, my very much hope that the current stability in the oil market remains, and the Iraq stability, therefore, is nowadays critical for the global economy and for the global oil markets.
But things are not likely to get better if you look at the realities, sir. I'm afraid to say so, because of the Iran issue and also because of many of the factors and forces that are fighting in Iraq as a result of different reasons. So how would you be able to work with the international community to bring in, first of all, stability into the region? Of course, that's not specifically your job description, but you have a big chunk of interest in this.
I really hope that the Iraqi people enjoy a peaceful political environment, because within the country there are already some problems, and also outside of the country there are pressures coming to the country itself. So Iraq has in fact a huge amount of oil and gas resources. It can well be a prosperous country in a very short period of time if there was a political stability there. So my wish is that political stability should be maintained and will be with Iraq for many years to come, and as a result of that the country reaches prosperity that it deserves.
What about Iran? Now, according to JCPOA, there are certain agreements describing what the international community who have signed that agreement with Iran will do, for example, purchasing the oil under certain circumstances. Now, U.S. withdrew from it, and U.S. has been punishing economies that are trying to fulfill the promises in the JCPOA agreement. Now, even more complicated now, Iran has indicated to a certain extent that it's likely to leave the JCPOA in real terms, not announcing it directly though. So, Dr. Birol, what about that part of the oil supply internationally? It's not just about providing oil to the economies, it's also about something even more important about denuclearization.
Now, Iran has a significant amount of oil and gas resources, but having the resource and production is something, being able to export is something else. And we all know that Iran faced major challenges with the international community, and there were sanctions on Iran. As a result of those sanctions, Iran's exports went from 2.8 million barrels per day today down to almost 0.3 million barrels per day. So I really hope that Iran will solve its problems with the international community, with the countries, and we will see a much better oil markets in the next months or years.
But is it only Iran's problem in a way? There are parties in the JCPOA who walked away from the agreement, and also the killing of the military general in Iran, which is not a widely accepted international practice, have brought up so much chaos as a result, and not to mention the neighboring Iraq. So who else would you call on to play a constructive role in this regard, Mr. Birol?
It's an international political issue. My job is, as an energy person, just to hope that the countries come together and solve their problems in a peaceful way, because energy markets need political stability, and the Middle East is at the heart of it. And I really hope that all the countries in the region work very closely together, and also with the other countries in the world.
Russia, another very important oil exporter. Now, geopolitics has been also becoming complicated. I'm afraid one question after another for you, sir. Even though Russia has been changing its government this time, we do not know yet as to what specific policy it will come out. So, Dr. Birol, what do you make of the current status of Russia providing oil supply to the rest of the world, first of all? Secondly, Russia's partnership with some of the growing economies, China included, from your perspective about energy?
Now, Russia is an energy country. Russia is one of the cornerstones of the global energy markets, and will remain so many years to come. I really hope that Russia will continue to provide oil, gas to the rest of the world. It will be Europe, it will be China, it will be other countries, and I really hope that the energy and politics are not going to be interwoven, but energy remains as a business, as a part of the economy.
Yeah. Dr. Biro, another question, sustainable development. Now, alternative energy important, but it is not likely to play an overall role in the global energy supply yet. Coal, meanwhile, has becoming a very controversial issue, but for big economies, it's one of the must to provide another 80 to 90%. You are in charge of energy. So many different things going on among them and between them. What do you make of the current picture and the choices economies have to make for their own interest and also for the global common good, sir?
Nowadays, the life for the energy decision makers is not very easy. Because there are at least three pressures.
Looking at your busy schedule here, yes, I already figured that out.
There are at least three important pressure points. One is that governments have to provide energy at affordable prices to their consumers, to their economy. Second, they have to make sure that energy security is important for the country, not too much reliance on other countries and having the energy always available. And third, they have to see that the use of energy doesn't harm the environment, the climate change. So they have to make a trade-off between these three important pressure points. And here I understand that the renewable energies such as solar, wind, hydro growing very strongly around the world, for which China is the leader in the world, going strongly, but it seems that we will still rely on traditional fuels for some years to come, with, of course, implications for our environment.
So any solution to that?
The solution is using energy much more efficiently. Energy efficiency is very important. Nuclear power is very important. And clean energy technologies such as solar power, wind, these are all very important technologies.
Dr. Biro, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
nice
sir.
to talk to you. Thank
yes.
you.
Welcome back. You're watching Davos Insight, our special program on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum. I'm Tian. When the world is facing inequality and division, partly as a result of how people feel they are being treated at workplace, Guy Ryder, the Director General of the International Labour Organization, is destined to struggle with various battlegrounds. I talked to him on the sideline of the World Economic Forum about all of these battlegrounds. Mr. Director General, good to see you at the World Economic Forum.
Good to see you again.
I remember dearly our conversation just a few months ago,
yes.
But things have changed so much. So what do you make of the issue of labor in such a world of uncertainties?
Yeah, uncertainty and change, I think, are the only constants of our world at the moment.
But not this degree, not intensity like this.
It's quick, it's deep, and it's worldwide. Now, I think you can try and break this down. What is making our world change so quickly? Technology, climate change and what we must do about it. I would say demography as well. Sometimes
That's right.
we forget that. Different tendencies in different parts of the world. And then globalization, how we can cooperate together to make this global economy work well. And I think many of the uncertainties are also coming against this background of change from policy uncertainties. We don't seem to be able to get on as well as we used to.
Let's talk about policy uncertainties, particularly in the issue of labor, which
Right.
is your expertise.
Right.
Now, you have been releasing a latest report talking about the global labor issue, particularly with the technological change. Tell me more about that. How really to train the massive amount of people about the new technology?
Okay, where are we starting from? We're starting from a world where unemployment is about 5.4%, 188 million people.
Yes.
But that's only the tip of the iceberg, because the really realistic and important figure are those people who are underemployed, working very little, or are discouraged from working because they have no opportunities. If you add them in, the figure goes to 13.4%.
Look at that.
So we start from a fairly tough situation, and it's not getting better. Add to that all of these factors of change, and the one that worries people most, new technologies. Look, I don't believe that new technology by definition is a job destroyer. The question is, can we prepare people to take advantage of the new opportunities and get out of those places where jobs will disappear?
Can we answer that question?
Well, I think that the sort of the one-word answer to that question, and it's not very convincing as one word, nothing so simple, is lifelong learning. We have to work out how people can be upskilled, reskilled throughout their working life. You know, now we don't learn at the beginning of our lives, then work, then retire, then die. It's all intertwined throughout.
It's all intertwined, but I can remind you, Mr. Ryder, no matter how kind-hearted you are because of the seat you're sitting here, there are many other sectors you have to work with. First of all, companies. What is driving companies? Why would they provide such a huge amount of energy to train these people? Secondly, how to coordinate schools, different institutions, and jobs. And as well, on an international basis, what about flow of labor? All of this complicated.
Lifelong learning is the answer, but there are three unanswered questions.
Go ahead, sir.
Number one, we do not have the delivery systems. We know that we want lifelong learning. We do not have the delivery systems for it. How to connect schools to government, to employers. Secondly, what is the respective responsibility of government, of business, and of the individual themselves, which is an important question. And the third unanswered question, how do we pay for all of this? Who's going to pay for it? And whilst everybody, talks as a mantra of the need for lifelong learning, these are unanswered questions which, in my view at least, we now have to really urgently begin to answer as an investment, not a cost. This is the
Are you trying to figure that out with business leaders and also policymakers at the current World Economic Forum? Where are we now in figuring out all those answers?
At the beginning is the answer to that. The answer to your question is yes, we are trying to figure it out. In our program of work at the ILO, we're making this a top priority, but it is not true if anybody thinks this is easy. And it will be a bumpy road. There's no doubt about that. It's going to be a bumpy road. But the more we delay, the more difficult it will become.
Yeah, and the other thing, of course, is about the policy issue, geopolitics, particularly. If you look at some of the major power rivalry.
Yes.
We even illustrated in the Global Risks Report by the World Economic Forum.
We do.
This is going to be one of those most important issues facing the world. Now, for labor too, I guess, in this regard, because what's going to be the relations among these countries and how labor is going to circulate around the world. How do you look at that from your perspective, sir?
Yeah, we are at a position where we're part of the multilateral system and we look after labor issues. The multilateral system is suffering at the moment. These tensions, frankly, the lack of interest or commitment to multilateralism in some places, that hits us. And it's not just our organization, it hits the global economy, and I think this constitutes a large part of the downside risks. And if growth slows down because of trade tensions, well, labor will suffer. There will be less jobs, and the jobs will be less well paid and of less quality. We need to resolve these issues. We need to resolve these issues. And here's an interesting point.
Okay.
Many of the tensions that bring about these situations have their roots in the world of work. You see, policymakers are responding to what people are experiencing and their frustrations and their anger. And I think our inability to answer problems in people's working lives is generating some of these international situations. We need to go back and look at ordinary people.
What are some of these problems?
Well, the most basic one of all, we've mentioned unemployment per se, but too many people in the world are seeing their wages stagnate. They have the idea that despite the fact that the world is growing, they're not getting a part of this. We've seen over 30 years income move away from labor and towards capital. The labor share of income, that proportion of national income going to labor, for example, has declined to 51%, historic lows. So people are frustrated, and they tend to look for someone to blame.
Yes.
And they don't always look in the right place, and they don't always look for the right solutions. But this is what's imposing, I think, these stresses on our attempt to manage the international economy in the way we want.
But Mr. Ryder, that is dealing directly with the root of capitalism, isn't it? I mean, there is a tendency of this system. No one is blaming whether one system is good or the other is not,
Sure.
but rather the nature of the system.
Yeah.
It's about getting those wealth in a few's hands. That's what the nature of it. Can you change the nature of the system?
But you know, I don't know what you find. I find coming to Davos, to the World Economic Forum, the sort of the temple of capitalism.
Yeah.
And they're talking about resetting capitalism.
But talking about it, but doing it.
Well, I agree with you there. It's talking and doing are two different things.
Yeah.
And the second point is, why have this conversation? And some people think, well, actually, we want to have this conversation just to make sure the system continues, more or less it has done in the past. Just put the train back on the rails, carry on as normal. I think we need to be more ambitious than that. And,
how can be ambitious?
Well, it goes to some very fundamental issues, doesn't
Yes.
it? Now, people here could make a big difference.
Yes.
There's one paradox of Davos. The people inside Davos think this is a place where the difference can be made. People outside Davos don't believe that. So I think we need to be more inclusive.
I think we need to be less skeptical rather than focusing their attention more on the real issues.
Yeah, I mean, skepticism and cynicism never got you anywhere.
No.
But here is a problem. People are losing confidence in their politicians and their political leaders. The traditional political parties in much of the world are being thrown out. So that skepticism, that cynicism, I'm afraid it's the mood music of the moment. And we have to give people reason to believe that there is something better available.
And that's why we need a multilateral platform like yours
We do.
to be able to remind people
Yes.
about the priorities. Having said that, though, another important issue, Mr. Ryder, is the labor law. Now, you know very well, in different cultures, different economic stage development, there are different kinds of labor laws. Now, there are usually conflicts sometimes as a result of differences in labor laws, and some protectionists make use of labor laws to say what they want to say. So, sir, how do you look at the differences while at the same time be able to put the string, make sure everybody is having equal footing here?
My organization has 187 member states. Now,
you have a big enough headache, but also big enough challenge to work with.
It's a headache, but the point is the following, and it's the rationale of our organization. We have to try to establish what we call the rules of the game, applicable to everybody, rich, poor, east, west, north, south. So we establish the general principles of labor law, understanding that these general principles will be applied in different ways, in different circumstances. And that's the reality. And the international labour standards of the ILO, and they are often referenced in trade agreements and in trade disagreements, are the key to this. Now, our job is to bring everybody on board. Is it impossible? No, it's not. Is it difficult? Yes, it is. And, you know, sometimes these issues are politicised. They're used for objectives which are not the stated objectives, and we have to be careful not to let that happen. But this standard rules of the game for the global economy has to include labour. It can't just be investment, finance and the rest. It has to include labour.
Mr. Ryder, I have to say, you bring a little sunshine already to many of the issues people have been very much anxious about. I want to thank you for your precious time at the World Economic Forum. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your invitation.
Appreciate it. You're watching Davos Insight at the World Economic Forum, a special program of World Insight. And we'll be back after this.
I want to wish the Chinese and the global audience all the best for the China New Year. It's the year of the rat, and I hope this year will bring you happiness, health, success, and everything what you are dreaming of.
My name is Nana Addo Akufo-Addo. I'm the President of the Republic of Ghana, and I'm wishing all of you, 1.4 billion people, a happy Lunar New Year.
I'm Eric Rubin, Editor-in-Chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, and I want to wish everyone a happy Lunar New Year.
Hello, my name is Jin Qing. Hi, everyone. This year's, the Chinese New Year's with a start beginning, so I wish everybody all the happiness with your family, with yourself, and all the dreams you're wishing for will come true. And take care of yourself. All the best.
You're watching Davos Insight. At the time of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, a global strategy, however, to ease hunger and extreme poverty is still crucial, argues Gilbert Fusang Humble, the president of the International Fund for Agricultural Development. In an in-depth interview with me, he tried to map out solutions and his utmost attention on the livelihood of small farmers at grassroots level throughout the world. Mr. Humble, what a pleasure to see you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been meeting grassroots farmers from all over the world during your yearly travel. What are exactly they are demanding right now when it comes to agricultural development?
See, the grassroots producers, first of all, they have a lot of dignity. So they don't want to be assisted kind of infinitively assistance. They want to take charge of their life. So most of the things that they will be asking you is what will help them to take charge of their life.
What's your answer in different economies?
So what we do is not only a matter of policy, but concretely, the projects we finance are the projects that will help them being self-sufficient, generate economy for themselves, both in farm and non-farm area.
Give me two examples.
Now, for example, would be to ensure that a cooperative could be very well trained and can take care of buying the fertilizer by themselves.
For example, in Africa?
In Africa, in South or Southeast Asia, in some part of the Caribbean, and we are in those three continents.
What about in the developed economies?
In the developing economies, the problem, of course, is much more acute. We know that we have in this whole world 820 million people that still go to bed hungry, and 80% of them are in the rural area. So it's much more important for us to focus our intervention in the rural area.
Right.
So what you do is you target the women, because we know that by targeting the women, the production is much more likely to increase and to have a multiplying effect. We also are focusing obviously on the youth through giving them opportunity either to training or rural finance for them to be able to start their own SMEs in the rural setting.
Right. What about for developed economies? Agriculture is a very controversial issue usually in the economies. Subsidies, trade wars, all of this related to it. What about in the developed economy, sir?
No, clearly we know that the food system as is today, the food system is broken. This is one of the reasons why the Secretary General Gutierrez is calling for a food system summit next year, 2021. So the subsidy is an issue, a big issue, which is politically difficult for some countries, but sooner or later that will have to be tabled. We know that food production worldwide for decades, we produce more than we need to feed the 8 billion that we are now. So it's a matter of distribution, a matter of managing the food waste and loss. It's also a matter of ensuring that it's not just about food security, it's also about a mean for the producers to really get their fair part of the value they contributed to create it.
But if you see the agricultural industry worldwide, or shall we say the agriculture sector, because in some economies there's no yet much agricultural industry. You will see farmers from developing economies apparently are in a quote-unquote fight or even struggle with their counterparts in the developed economies as a result of various politics and also policies. How do you see that reality, sir?
In reality, you will not see a face-to-face challenge, but through their contribution to the value chain or the supply chain, yes, the problem does exist. Today, we are here in Switzerland. If you were to take to buy a coffee, an espresso, maybe at 5 Swiss francs, what the portion of that goes to that farmer that really raised the coffee to start with? Very little. And we don't even have enough credible data on that. And the farmers, those farmers, they still don't have enough access to the internet, so they can also have transparent information to be able to negotiate.
That's right.
So that caused a lot of unfairness, and this is why in IFAD we are really focusing 100% of our activity in supporting, and this is why I'm saying that our way is to support them to take charge of themselves, and one of the things you got to do is to bring them to have the voice.
Yes.
To be able also to know their interest and to defend it.
That's going to be a very complicated project, isn't it?
But not impossible.
All right. Let me also ask you about leapfrogging. One of the things developing economies have is the advantages of doing leapfrogging as a result of technological advancement and applications of it. So how much opportunity, sir, do you see right there? What does that mean for the grassroots farmers that you've been talking to, who finds frustrated out of the chaos right now?
I mean, the problem is there, I have to confess. The technology, we all need it, including our smallholders. They're going to need the technology. But most of the innovation are also happening where the private sector genuinely believe they're going to make money to really get their return on investment as quick as possible. Yeah. And those domains are not necessarily where the smallholder, the small producer, are much more in need. So there could be a mismatch between where the innovation is going and where are the real need from a social perspective. This is why we do believe that, but we need the private sector.
Yes.
We need the innovators.
But how to match?
To match it, so we need to also, the public finance and the government policy also have to contribute together with the private sector to ensure that some of those investments are targeted to the need of the grassroots producers. Because, you see, we need to increase the productivity, and we need to really make sure they have a very good storage, and they can do basic transformation without having to create huge industries.
That's well said. But are there some specific cases and studies, or case studies, shall we say, examples that people can get inspirations from? Give me one or two very specific ones, not policy, but with real people.
The equipment for planting, which help the smallholders to be 3 times faster. There has been also some equipment developed in China, in India, which has now been very helpful through South-South cooperation with a lot of low-income countries in Africa and elsewhere, where you can use basic drip irrigation, which might not be the same sophistication as the drip irrigation used in the Western Hemisphere, but already helping improving the irrigation and therefore the productivity.
Poverty alleviation, very important subject. Agricultural development in emerging economies and developing countries is a big contributor to that. Now, China, for example, Mr. Humble, has vowed to eradicate extreme poverty by the end of this year. Now, of course, every country has their different standards about what extreme poverty means. Having said that, though, how will agricultural development contribute to that, not dragging the goal down? I'm not just talking about China, I'm talking about everywhere.
No, first of all, we know that if you look at the period 2000-2015, the MDG era, we know that the progress that were made, a huge part of it came from China. And I'm I do believe, I'm very confident that China will meet the target that the government fixed for itself for 2020 to eradicate extreme poverty, be it $1.25 a day or $1.80 a day, etc. That being said, the agriculture part, we really need to know that what we call SDG 2, which is zero hunger, is one of those goals that are really lagging behind. And so unless we tackle seriously that angle, it will bring the whole objective down. We will not be able to reach it. This is why I'm very grateful to see China's leadership at the national level, but also at the international level. So we are really calling for a special effort to really make sure the different dimension of the food security is really tackled in the next 10 years.
Another thing very important is the geopolitics that is bringing so much uncertainty. The Global Risks Report of the World Economic Forum even identified the big power rivalry as one of the biggest issues of danger for the future. For your small farmers, whether from developing country or developed economies, how do you look at this issue? And how much is their livelihood really related to this?
Well, you know, in my country, we say that when you have two elephants that are fighting, usually it's the grass who pays the price. So here the grass are my smallholder farmers. We are very much concerned. We are very much concerned about the current geopolitics and the power fighting, to be very frank. And that has a risk. If there's no, internationally speaking, agreement on key issues like the climate change, like the trade, like the SDGs, like how best to fight fragilities, the fight for security, etc. If there's no agreement on that, the situation can get worse. I take the example of the Sahel today. If you look at the Sahel, where we see what is going on there, everything can collapse if there is no strategic agreement at that level. And it's very important that everybody individually and collectively and at the country level, we really give additional impetus to the multilateralism and to the discussion and solving problems by diplomacy.
Finally, before we go, Mr. Humble, we know the issues. We also know there needs to be a list of tasks that we have to finish. But we are always being blurred all the time by headlines and mix of priorities. Before a real crisis, which are taking enormous amount of lives, people just tend to have the tendency not to focus on it. Mr. Humble, from the agricultural development perspective, how do you see that?
You see, you're very right, and I'm afraid that you're right. The tragedy for us is that development takes time to yield to results. It has to be a long-term thing. But then the humanitarian crisis, of course, which costs more, but will naturally get from us, from all the consumers or the taxpayers, they need to act immediately. So what's happened, very often the humanitarian crisis will zip a big part of the whole resources available for development, rightfully. But what I'm saying is that we should not wait when there's a crisis before we invest in development. That's why if you look at IFAD, our really logo, we talk about investment in rural people on that. So I can only call for not only continuing the humanitarian action because it's really needed, but in addition to always think that we should invest in development. This is really the assurance or the insurance for us if we want to get long-term results.
We have a saying in China, instead of providing people with the fish onto the table, it's better to give them the opportunity to fish on their own.
I fully agree with that.
Thank you so much, Mr. Humble, for your precious time out of a very busy schedule.
Thank you for having me today.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And that will do it for this edition of Davos Inside, a special program of World Inside with me, Tian Wei. On behalf of our team in Beijing and in Davos, thank you for watching. We hope you are still enjoying the Spring Festival holiday. Have a lovely weekend. Bye for now from the Swiss mountaintop of Davos.